That's actually the first Indian mantra I ever learned. I was 14 years old. I heard it on a record, I forget where and when, but someone was just chanting this, Om Namah Shivaya, Shivaya Namaha, Om Namah Shivaya, Shivaya Namaha. And I just over and over. I just was walking through the streets of little town of Wexford in Ireland, chanting this mantra, mindlessly, no idea who Shiva was or what the words meant. So my introduction, interestingly, to Hindu thought and culture was through Lord Shiva. Lord Shiva is a very interesting character. The word Shiva means auspicious, sometimes also translated as pure. Yet, when we look at him, he's a very complex character. He seems to be full of contradiction. In ancient India, the India of the Vedas, you hear the names of certain deities mentioned. Actually none of them are represented here. But the ancient deities we don't talk about very much anymore. But Rudra was discussed, a name of Shiva, at that time. So it's a very, very ancient idea, this idea of Shiva, as he was called then Rudra. But Rudra was excluded from sacrifice. So when you do your Havan now, this was in ancient times Agnihotra. So it was a very elaborate sacrifice, and the Vedas are actually, they tell in very, very precise terms how you set up the kund and the mathematical precision of how it's supposed to reflect the cosmos. It's very, very complex. And there are prayers to Agni, prayers to Indra, Agneshaya, Namaha, etc. All the demigods, but not Shiva. He's not given an offering. He was excluded. Yet at the same time, by many people, he's considered to be God himself. So on one side he's the supreme, and on the other side he's excluded by everybody. So that's rather contradictory. There is a story about that I'll tell you a little bit later as to the time that he did start to get included in sacrifice. It was much later on in things. He's also considered exceedingly peaceful. When we see him on the altar here, he's sitting with Parvati, and he's sitting very peacefully, just sitting there. The Ganges comes and slaps on his head, comes from the heavenly kingdom, and he's the only person who could bear the weight. Yet he just sits there peacefully. Normally, if we have a big pressure, there's a word suffering. It's a Latin word that means to be underneath. So the worries of the world are on top of you, and you're underneath. You have to bear them. This is considered suffering. So he's underneath the Ganges, and he has to bear the weight of the Ganges. Yet he's just sitting there serene, absolutely peaceful. At the same time, he's considered wildly destructive. His is the dance of destruction, but absolutely wild. His hair flies in all directions, and he bounces around, beating a drum, and he's waving his trishul, and you don't know where it's going to poke. So, two visions of the same person. Again, very contradictory. He's also considered to be an ascetic, a renunciant. He sits there in complete renunciation and with his peace. At the same time, he's associated with something of the erotic. There's something about him that's a bit off-beat. He has more than one wife, and has very loving relationships with them. Very famous story of, I don't know if you've heard of Chitraketu. He's mentioned in the Bhagavad Purana. Very saintly person. But when he was traveling in the air by yogic power above Kailash, where Lord Shiva lives, he looked down and he saw Shiva with Parvati on his knee, embracing her, giving a pravachan to sadhus, to all these sannyasis, listening to Shiva with his wife on his knee, being embraced. And it just looked so funny to him. He laughed and laughed and laughed, and Parvati cursed him. That's a whole other story. But it's just so incongruous. How is he so renounced, and at the same time, he's the ideal grahastha. And his family life is very, very nice. He has Ganesh, who we worship, Kartikeya or Skanda, his other son, who's also very highly worshipped, particularly in the south of India. So that, everyone associated with him is auspicious, is powerful. So interesting that he has, again, these different sides. He's also a warrior. He's engaged in warfare. Now we talked about him being peaceful as well earlier on. And at the same time being a renunciant. So he's got, and everything about him is contradictory. And this is part of the definition of Shiva. Shiva is achitya, incomprehensible to us. We can't understand him. We try and grasp him from one side or another side, but as soon as we think we've got him, we hear another story that disproves that understanding. So he's a very interesting character, and every tradition in Hinduism respects him. And you have the very high-class Brahmins of South India being the pujaris at a Shiva temple. You go to the Balaji temple in Birmingham, and they have, wonderful Pakka puja. The South Indians are just, they're the guys to go to for really good puja. They put on a brilliant show, and they wear, scarlet red dhotis, and, earrings, and, and all the mantras are properly pronounced. Everything's very, very good. Yet, when you go in, you've got a shrine to Ganesh and a shrine to Shiva, but the main deity is Balaji, is Vishnu. But the Shaivite priests that you meet there, wonderful people, nicest people you'd ever meet, and they just focus on Shiva. The Vaishnava priests don't do Shiva puja, and the Shaivite priests don't do Vaishnava puja. They just leave it to each other. So they've got this, you go in, you've got all these different things going on. But the puja is excellent, right? These very Pakka Brahmins, they lead a very good life. They live in the temple compound as they would in South India. And then you go to the Himalayas and you get all these groups of Naga Babas, naked, matted hair, covered in ashes, smoking marijuana. The Rastafarians from Trinidad, they smoke ganja, which is a Hindi word for marijuana. They got the idea from Shaivites who went to Trinidad. So this is one of India's exports. You may not be as proud of this as you have been of other exports, but just to let you know. So again, these are two very different sides of Lord Shiva. Look at his followers. Highest class of Brahmins, and then on the other side, these very strange, incomprehensible people who are essentially hippies. And Shiva himself is a bit of a hippie.
Yeah.
He's an outsider. He's not in the regular course of events. He was very happy not to get the offerings from the Mariyakas. He didn't care. He was that detached. And he lived in a crematorium, and he covered himself in ashes. So these weren't ordinary ashes. These were the ashes from the crematorium god. These are the ashes of the dead. This is like some tantric thing. But it's to show his renunciation, his lack of care for the world. And again, the matted hair, very good. Yet at the same time, so profoundly wise. And these contradictions, as I say, Shiva is elevated in every tradition. The Vaishnavas in the Bhagavad Purana, there's a text that says, Vaishnavanam yatha Sambhu. Sambhu is another name for Shiva. Shiva is the greatest of all the Vaishnavas. So even though they don't worship Shiva necessarily, but they take him and elevate him above all of themselves. That next to Vishnu, he's a man. So their point is that when Shiva is sitting in meditation, who's he meditating on? Vishnu. The Shastras think, who's he meditating on? Parvati. Durga. Kali, So everyone's got their little twist. So the Shiva Purana will say something else. So everyone has tremendous respect for them, and they put him at the absolute highest point of their pantheon. Obviously, the Shakta worshippers, he's the husband of any Shakta. So they have to take him and incorporate him. He has to be the next best thing. But the Vishnu worshippers, everybody else, takes him the same. So he's taken this elevated status. And I'll tell you a little story that just helps us understand the contradiction and why it's relevant for us today. why it's important to understand the stories of Shiva. And that's what Shivratri is about. It's about a time to fast, leave the material world aside as he does, and then just remember these stories. And worship Shiva very, very simply. He's worshipped just with fruits and flowers and bay leaves. There's no demand. He's very easily satisfied. That's the point of Lord Shiva. You don't have to do any special thing for him. He's a guy who lives in a graveyard, as you say. He doesn't need a lot. Which means he's available for the lowest in society. So the drug addicts, the alcoholics, anyone who has nothing to offer anyone who is offering isn't interesting to anyone. They're the people that Shiva will accept their offering. They don't need any form of ritual. They just come and give what they can. And he just accepts the intention. Just the fact that you approach him and give something, he's perfectly happy with that. Thank you very much. And he'll give some benediction, just to elevate the person a little higher. So he's available for everyone. So he's the Lord of Kamas. He's not himself in ignorance, but anyone who is in ignorance can easily become his devotee. So he's considered extremely merciful, extremely approachable. That's why his associates are all Buddhas and Christs and all these strange characters, very offbeat. When they're in his presence, they're very peaceful, but otherwise you wouldn't trust them with anything. So the story of Nalini Kanta, that's the name for Lord Shiva. It means blue throat. There's a blue line around his neck, which must be up there. It's usually that. But the demigods and the demons had a fight. Long story. They had a fight. And they were given the benediction of the Mandara mountain, part of the Himalayas. They were supposed to churn it, put a big rope around it, that was actually a snake, and one side pulled one bit and one side pulled the other, and they made a nectar of immortality from this. And that's another story as well, big fight about that. But also out of the churning came poison. So Shiva was the one who got the poison and drank it so that no one would be disadvantaged. And it stopped in this blue line, this is the sign of this. So he has this necklace of poison, so to speak, around his neck. When people come and try to imitate Shiva's detachment, rather than actually have it achieved in their life through realization, but they imitate the things about Shiva that are easily imitatable, to be antisocial, to be outside society, to smoke marijuana, take intoxication of some kind. That they'll do easily. But the spiritual side of it is, can you drink an ocean of poison? If you can't do that, you can't do the other. And that's what we forget. So there is a balance to this. Shiva's position is actually very sacred. He's not an ordinary person. And that's something that we forget in the modern day. We all become the superhero. That's what we're all aspiring for, to be the celebrity, to have all the wealth and the beauty and the fame and the adoration and the following. Well, Shiva doesn't look for that. He does quite the opposite. He goes to the dirtiest place imaginable and sits there to do his bhajan, where nobody in their right mind should follow him. And still he's worshipped by everybody and respected. Why? Because of his detachment, because of his spirituality. He has a jewel that's more valuable than any amount of fame or beauty or wealth or intelligence. And it's that incomprehensible something that we're all attracted to. It shines through his person in everything he says and everything he does. And that's what Lord Shiva is about. He's to help us understand that there's more to life than just the material. The things that give us immediate gratification. And we look at those things, we look at the X factor, and we see this person rise up through the ranks and get £100,000 or whatever it is in record deals and all stuff. And 2 years later, we haven't heard of them since. Famous for 15 minutes, etc. Or you see someone become really famous, but Whitney Houston, at one time the most famous, wonderful singer, she had a gift of a beautiful voice. At 48, she's dead because of dissolute life. Because she couldn't lead the life of Shiva. we couldn't drink that poison. So therefore, don't try. Don't try and be like Shiva. Don't try and be like God. We are not God. And Shiva he teaches us this lesson in a very humble way. The other story that I very much like about Shiva is not as much the story of his, but the story of Sati, his wife. Mm-hmm. Sati was very young. Young people are a bit passionate, shall we say. What was it? Oscar Wilde said, "Youth is wasted on the young." More passionate sex. So she was the daughter of Daksha. Daksha means expert. He was expert in creating progeny. So he was a very good procreator. He was the person who was developing the planet, making sure there was enough people around, had lots of wives. And he gave his daughter to Lord Shiva. And she went to a big yajna that her father had put on, but her husband wasn't invited. She was very upset about this, but Lord Shiva said, "I never invited to these Agnihotras. Don't worry, I'm very peaceful." And she went along and she saw everyone there, and because she's a young woman, she wants the social aspect, and she wants her husband to be part of her social life, and she wanted everyone to be part of this, and she was upset, and got more and more upset, and eventually she burned herself up in her anger, literally burned herself up. This is where the idea we have of Sati comes from. So she was a yogi. She had this power that she could do that. And the word got back to Lord Shiva, and he was very upset, who had put his wife in a position where she would do this to herself. So he got angry, got up off his seat, got his trishul, got his army of ghosts and spirits and hobgoblins, everything you've seen in The Hobbit, they were all with him. And the Lord of the Rings and all that. And he came with his army of gurus, and he just went through the Agnihotra ceremony and just beat everyone up. One of the priests looked at him and started to laugh because he'd never seen Shiva before. He just looked so funny. And a guru came up and smashed his teeth. And the story is a very interesting story. Yeah. But then he met Daksha, and Shiva chopped his head off. And he said, "You are not worthy to be anyone's father, that you don't protect your daughter enough, that you allow her such shame that she will kill herself." And then his anger abated, and he realized, actually, maybe this isn't right. Actually, the only person who could stop him was Brahma. Nobody else could stop his anger. When Shiva gets going, into the peaceful side, the wildly destructive side, it was like the devastation was starting. So that had to be stopped. None of the demigods could stop him. Indra went and said, please, Lord Shiva. He just pushed them aside. But Brahma was his father, so he had respect. So he stopped because of Brahma. And then Brahma said, the unfortunate thing is we're dependent on Daksha. He's actually very productive, and we need him to populate the planet. So what are we going to do now? So Shiva thought, actually it's true, that wasn't a good thing to do. So he got a goat's head and put it on Daksha's body, because it was the nearest thing available. And unfortunately Daksha, in all the representation now, has a goat's head. A bit of bad karma for poor old Daksha. But it's a nice story just to show how Shiva was actually detached from the Agnihotra and the fame, the celebrity, the social aspect of life that Sati was very attached to. But what he was attached to was that things were done properly. When things weren't done properly, then destruction will take place. And then he got involved in destruction. Okay, now you've stepped out of line. Now things have to change. So it's an interesting little story. That was it, some thoughts on Shiva, 450.